Okay, I'm going to do these videos kind of in segments as requested and try to get the idea of how or why a lot of this occurs that on a cellular level that a lot of people have kind of overlooked, or as we've evolved, we haven't kind of added to the thought processes anymore that used to be there. Here you'll see kind of the basic three that we keep up in our back office here. Obviously the central nervous system, skeletal, and the muscular. Nothing that in a basic anatomy book won't teach you the basic breakdowns of each, how each looks, how each basically functions, depending upon if you're into anatomy or kinesiology, of the movement of the muscle and or the organism. But as we look at this, what we're starting to look at and what we start to actually want to work into more is where you're seeing the breakdowns of efficiencies. And that's where we start to notice a little more advanced training that go a little bit beyond what we've been looking at recently, but you're seeing what we put into in the real quick entry level stuff we did on Instagram there. And I'm going to keep this real brief, but obviously they are separate systems as we've classified it as humans, but unfortunately the human body doesn't know or recognize what we tried to break it into, that our minds have yet to fully fathom what the capacities or capabilities of the human body are actually able to fully take themselves up to, as we're still working on strengths and seeing strengths recently that we've never seen before, but in reality have recorded histories that show otherwise. And that's some of the things you see some of us corresponding online about, is how some of the history we've forgotten and have not put into textbooks of modern type study. So when we look at anything that you think of basic adaptation of muscular system, it's not even a common thing, or an uncommon thing, excuse me, to say, hey, you know, I go into the gym, I train a little bit, I add a little weight on, I get stronger. And that's not even a thought. People go, yeah, that's obvious. And if I say the same thing with the bone system, I say, hey, if we start adding in weight to the bone, it changes. And people will just kind of look at you. And that's kind of the problem. When we think of each system and look at the stressors put upon it, it adapts, it grows, expands. We can look at that in the central nervous system as we, even now, as each one of us goes online or picks up a book and we learn new things and we start to understand new processes or philosophies or whatever we're looking at that period of time, our brain mechanism, obviously the computer system, picks it up, it understands it, we utilize it in those areas, and we expand our thinking processes, as we put it. But then we never really look at the nervous system in itself, and the continuous is down. We hear of things like mind to muscle. We hear of areas of, if you focus on it long enough, you can actually control it better in the motor patterning within those mechanisms of the body. And you start to understand that the nervous system itself will grow and adapt and create higher levels of adaptation to those areas. So we can actually become more responsive. There's a higher surgence of electrical transfer and response between the brain and the functional physical itself. And then we can look at it again, and obviously that expands into the higher increase of the actual robotic portion or the musculature system. And we won't get into that in depth because obviously you can break that down excessively. But it's there, and you can see, obviously, if you take the time to look that up, it's there. What I really want to look at is the skeletal system itself, and what it does is the basics of the framework of movement. But what we don't think of a lot of times is the amount of torque that is going on because of how much output of generated force upon it, both from weight bearing, force creation, or the fact of the actual angles and articulations that are being wrenched on as the body moves how it's supposed to correspondently. So keep in mind, as you're doing a heavy squat, all those leverages and all that muscle is cranking on that bone, which takes a lot of force and shear force just on the bone itself. Then we got to look at, if you've trained the human body correctly, and let's say as a fighter, and you're teaching them to strike, you've created an additional force that's being escalated over time because you're doing your job very well, or that's the goal anyway, that in time they are becoming technically advanced, their technique is becoming very good, they're getting better with their strikes, they're more able to do it at a faster rate, but they're also looking at a higher generation of force. So the kick impact is getting higher, the knuckle impact, or the pound, ground and pound elbows, the striking points, become at a much higher rate of both velocity but impact against something else. And that's where we've kind of deterred away of looking at both the spine, and this is where we had talked to actually Louis Simmons and then Elliot Baum out of Westside Barbell when I was down over some conversations, and it really started to get my mind thinking as we were working on a military personnel that had a titanium rod, which you can look back in some of the older stuff, and was put into his femur bone, and I was kind of curious on how those adjustments would be made between the human facet and the actual added molecular facet, or actually the titanium rod itself, and how we could get them to adapt and extend, or could we get a reaction to the bone better to this, better to the product. And those were different areas. And then looking at as human adaptation evolves, everything has a reaction. So we have to look at bones as a living thing. They're not this just solid product like the titanium. They're a porous product that has a full system going on. It's a full system, both chemically and then obviously for protective and use factor also. Cranial obviously for protection of the actual brain or the main control panel of the body, overall the major organs and so on and so forth. And then of course again the torquing mechanisms that create movement or allow us to move against reality, if you will, or in the earth itself. But when we look at those things and start to realize that going, okay, if you watch a strong man over time, when they were 16 years old, their body would not be able to hold the amount of weight they did, but over time, they increased all those weights to be able to sustain ability to hold those weights. Well, when we look at a human body, we can actually start to look at the adaptation of what bones, where, and how much, depending upon movement and angle. So when you look at the actual spine and the actual vertebrae themselves, you can actually start to see them go into what they call bone cortical or microfracturing, and then they heal back up. So if I went to you online and I talked to any person normally and be like, hey, if you walked in, I had you trip, you fell, you broke your arm, you got up, it hurt, obviously. We turned around, we took an x-ray, and it shows it's broke. We put it back in place, we wrap it up, in a matter of weeks or months, depending upon how bad the actual break was, you see that it both healed, but the biggest thing you have to realize is that it healed stronger. You can see the calcium buildup around the bone that was an accident. Well, if we take that thought and go, well, if I can control the environment, which we call training, we now can control the reaction to be a benefit to what we want to have done. And I want to say this again so it's very clear. This is not new. People have been doing this throughout the world for thousands of years and have already known it. This is something that's just been more the fact of kind of lost in history. You see Muay Thai do it constantly, and you're looking at it's a build-up process like any of the other systems. So in saying that, obviously, I don't recommend walking in and taking if you see 1,000-pound squat online, it's not where you start. And the Bodicor or bone reconstructions, it's not where you start, but start to understand the thought process of it so that you can take it and use it to your advantages. If you look back at what we called number 1, you'll see 2 UFC fighters, each kicked a shin or a tibia bone, which is this bone here. The bone obviously shattered. You're seeing it in pieces as you're seeing, and it's very simple. The leg has been able to generate higher levels of force than what the contact could maintain. In time, again, when you start looking at going, but why? Because if you think of how we've done training, we create a high output of training for musculature. We do a lot of mat time, we do a lot of kicking, but if you think kicking, you're kicking into some of the softer mats that are wrapped up, hands are wrapped up, heavy boxing gloves, heavy UFC gloves, heavy bags to where you're looking at you can work up, and that is the process. Please understand, I'm not saying that this is supposed to be done all the time, but you are looking at you do need to have a max effort time and then a healing process if you are the kind of person that's going to require this type of training. And if you do watch the strikers, again, like with Muay Thai, I mean, they are literally able to kick anything in half because they've built their shins and or other striking points up so heavy they literally become as porous or as hard as stone or a steel type product. When you think of that and you go, okay, well, obviously physics demands to have the weakest one breaks. If you didn't train yourself up, you're the weaker half, just like in those videos. Your action creates a reaction. You're the weaker product and you break or have a breakdown. If you fall on the floor, you have a breakdown. What we're looking at is a study again of those areas of knuckle, elbow, thigh, shin bone, feet, and different areas of striking to where you start to escalate the product choice per your programming that will advance the bone up to a point that's equal or higher in density or ability. So again, a muscle, the same thing. We're looking at that same system. We're not looking at walking in and starting off a 16-year-old guy that can just bench press 500 pounds. We start off with technique and understanding what we're doing. We work them up into a program. We build the muscle potential up to being able to get to the point of getting into a higher level programming. We then program in a different way to advance up to eventually in time, or if the goals are met correctly, to hit the 500 pound. Same with the bone. And that's where people were kind of confusing it. It really became a very simple thing of going, you start off in kindergarten and you end up a master's degree. Okay, so you didn't start off as a master's degree and work down to a kindergarten, nor did you just jump in without being able to read and go right into a Harvard degree of law. We obviously had a progressive manner that was required. It's really that simple. If we look at mind to muscle, it isn't always we have good brain response to all aspects of our body. If you watch a baby, they're looking at their hands, they're trying to get them to work. Over time, depending upon how much we've worked on it, will depend on how good your motor mechanics become. And in time, we have better motor mechanics. If you watch an advanced, say, martial artist or a dancer, they become excellent in their fields because they've worked very hard on creating that body control and body awareness to do what they've requested of it. The same thing with these type of things with training, and the same thing with the bone itself. So as we advance this, or I start to show some basics that it was tested, we can look at your normal training is going to be with the pads and products like that. A heavy bag obviously comes with different weights, and anybody's ever hit heavy bags, we know they get heavier, and that's just your common hitters. This is your 60, 70, and 80% range of consistencies. Really, when you look at the pyramid of what you want to do in training, your body can't maintain a max effort all the time. We know that in everything we do. So you can't go in and max out everything you do every single day. The Bulgarians obviously prove that there's only a very few in the world that can. I shouldn't say never. There are very few that can sustain it and maintain it without detriment. And we don't want that. So we do look at this as our normal products as we build up different things. But during that max efforts and those waves of training, you do want to look at different products to build up to. Some people would remember like the boards in the ground and they would do ropes on them. Some people would do trees with different products where they start with larger foams and work themselves down throughout history. Some of the Shaolin Temple, they do a lot on actual log type products, tree type products. They have posts in the ground that they work on. Wing Chun, actually, they have the actual fighting, the wooden fighting dummy that builds up those tolerances, and that's what they're doing. They're actually building up a callus in the bone, and that's another thing that we've used as an expression or an example is the fact that if you look at skin and you build up a normal tolerance for your lifting or the type of lifting, it's not even a thought to see a callus on hands or on knuckles for fighters or on knees for jiu-jitsu. It's that kind of thing that you're seeing different areas that they wear all the time. The skin reacts. It has an equal. It builds up a tolerance that allows you to advance without tearing those areas or hurting those areas anymore. Go above your threshold creates damage. Musculature, go above your threshold, injuries occur. Go above your threshold because you haven't trained with consistency and understanding, injuries occur. But the mindset is the fact of the reality of what the human body can do is it has an opposite and fully equal reaction to the stressors we place upon it. It's not the fact of how much we know, it's how far it can be taken. The human body can adapt and handle things that have gone outside of the realm of what we put it into this little box anymore, that unfortunately we call our fitness industry, but there are human beings that are doing things that are beyond what we thought were normal. That says that we need to change our thinking and understand that the human body is, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, that we have kind of put ourselves in a box and thought about it as a little lesser than what it's capable of. And I know a lot of people out there that we've been talking to and myself directly are all kind of in the same thought process, because how many people have you seen that can jump 30 feet and kick a bag in half? And that's not a common occurrence that you see, but it is doable. You've seen it. And we've also seen, which we put on a couple of the other videos, to where you're seeing for some of the young Muay Thai and some of these others that have actually corticaled up heavy enough, so they've bone hardened dense enough, that you're seeing them kick metal posts in half. If you look at different areas, you will see them kick cement posts in half. And if they can kick a cement post in half, you can truly respect when you're seeing someone come in and taking a thigh shot with those kind of hits and you're hearing them, I mean, just beat them down. You're like, why is this guy laying on the ground? It's not that big a deal. It's because you've never taken a shot in your leg with a guy that can kick a metal post in half. And that is a lot of impact. And that's the mindsets that we've been looking at, and we'll break this up a little bit more, and I hope this comes out. I'm trying to make it quick and kind of simple. I know it's a lot, but we can look at that with respect and understanding of going, if we accept it just as simply as it's a system, it's adaptable molecularly, we know that. We've seen it just on basic, if we take a basic x-ray of a broken bone, we know that. We know that they've done it, and it is potentially able to be done, which we've seen. It's online, it's out there, people still use it to this day all the time for microfracturing. It's called bone cortical, so if you ever need to look it up. And then obviously, how far could we advance it becomes as far as our mind can think, and how far the person is willing to put a commitment in to build their tolerances up to that. And I did test this on myself like I've done everything else. As you've seen, we do a lot of things that aren't normal, and that's exactly what I want. I want the high levels of things, which you've seen in pretty much every sport, or with the people I have talked to or worked with are some of the world's absolute best all times in many different divisions who've helped my knowledge advance to the point I'm kind of running out of people, which is a great thing. But this is some of the stuff that I've been working on behind the scenes because I normally don't come out very much. But this is one I think that is very important for our human species per se, and us as training capacities or availability of training capacity, that we hold ourselves back, that our mind is a molecular controller of a molecule-based organism that is put into systems that we can advance significantly beyond what we're allowing it to do because we've become very lackadaisical or accepting and a mediocre type mentality. So I hope that helps to kind of start us off here, to kind of guide in what we looked at and we put online. I did promise this video to some people, so I hope that they, I'm not after the large market, I'm not the large market guy, and obviously you can see I work on things that are not your normal marketing at all, but to give you an idea, it is very doable, and the systems are all acceptable. And I appreciate your time, and I hope this gets us started in the right directions. Thank you.